Stop fighting! Stop fighting the dog! I'm not, Jesus! I'm not! Put your fucking hands behind your back! Can you please get the dog off me? You are gonna have to wait just a second, lady. Sir, please! You shouldn't fucking run.
The night I got attacked by the police dog. Me and my friends was actually driving, and the police ended up putting the lights on us. My friend's in the back, he got out and ran. And so I'm thinking like, oh man, I need to get out. So I got out and I just started running. I didn't notice that the police had no dog. I didn't notice nothing for real. I was just running. And then he just grabbed me and he just started shaking me. And I was just hollering, screaming. He was telling me not to move or something.
Stop fighting the dog!
I'm like, I'm just still hollering and screaming. He could not get that dog on me. Once that dog got on me, it was like he tasted that blood. Oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. Like he was just shaking me and shaking me and shaking me. And I was just hollering.
Can you please get this dog off me? Can you please get this dog off me? You are gonna have to wait just a second, lady. Sir, please.
The dog had already attacked me. The dog still was trying to attack me once they got me off the ground. You know, I barely could walk. He was trying to take me to jail. And another police officer was like, no, she can't go to jail. Oh, we gotta call an ambulance. She gotta get seen about. I was just in total shock. My body had went into a state of shock. And when the ambulance came and they asked me to lay down, you know, and looked at it, they just started talking about how he was so wrong. They had to lay me down, you know, clean me up and look at me. The nurses was crying as they cleaned me. And they was telling me not to let him get away with it and how bad it was. And they was telling me that he was out there laughing and making jokes.
I can state emphatically that the use of dogs in the ways described from slavery through to the present absolutely has a racialized component. In the era of slavery, that was explicit, right? That was really the purpose of using dogs to enforce racial hierarchies and extraction and exploitation of Black labor. We have evidence dating to the 1520s of slave patrols being used in certain parts of the Spanish Americas. There are evidence of dog attacks in places like Santo Domingo, which is now the Dominican Republic, and also Panama. And that was against predominantly African descended populations, or people who were actually African captives. Every empire kind of participated in this. Everyone participated in similar kinds of ways, and that was to basically track runaways and sometimes intimidate enslaved populations on physical plantations. When dogs became a key component of expanding racialized slavery in North America was really, believe it or not, during the Seminole Wars in Florida. There were canines purchased specifically for slave tracking that had become quite famous and arguably infamous as well from places like Cuba. From Florida in the 1840s, these dogs then proliferated across the United States South. Preceding this arrival in the US South, there was a breed that kind of developed in Cuba. It was called the Cuban Bloodhound. These were dogs that were described as being as large as a mastiff, as fast as a greyhound, with the scenting capabilities of a bloodhound. So it's like this superior breed of dog that was specifically trained to be fast, to be aggressive, and to have amazing scenting capabilities to track and also attack, and sometimes to detain and sometimes to terminate humans, specifically Black bodies. That was the intent in the era of slavery in the Caribbean. Really, almost because of that notoriety, slave owners in the United States South knew how vicious and how effective these dogs could be. And so when this indigenous uprising began in Florida, the United States government then began allowing people to purchase dogs from Cuba. After the use in Florida, they were then used against almost exclusively enslaved populations across the South. Also, there were dogs on plantations to intimidate people on a day-to-day basis.
After about the 1830s, and particularly by the 1840s, you see a very large investment in bloodhounds specifically for tracking runaway slaves. During this particular moment, about 2 decades before the Civil War, you actually have a larger number of people running away from plantations in the U.S. South. For a number of poorer white people who didn't own enslaved people, they invested in the system of slavery by purchasing bloodhounds and advertising their skills as slave catchers. From what we can gather as far as the training techniques are concerned, a few formerly enslaved people that actually escaped slavery and wrote down in their memoirs how these dogs were trained. The slave owner or the slave hunter would force a black man to worry the dog, and I think that can be interpreted as beating the dog or mistreating it for a number of months or years from puppyhood. They did so until they had suggested that the dog acquired a specific hatred of a black person, and so they believed that the dog could be trained to differentiate racial groups. After the training process was complete, they would force a man to run through the woods, give him a head start, and if the dog could successfully track the man and tree him, which essentially means forcing him to climb up a tree, then the dog was considered fit for sale or fit for advertisement at that point. And so the conditioning within the antebellum South was specifically anti-black. Within the Civil War, you have the use of military dogs for very similar purposes. I mean, there are images that were released in the early 1860s during the conflict where dogs were specifically used against units comprised of black men. And so there was this consistent conditioning of anti-black interspecies violence that occurred in the Jim Crow period that was very much an extension of slavery. What we do find as far as official law enforcement and police policy is that dogs were a significant piece of the penitentiary system, so much so that even inmates who attempted to escape from the penitentiary wrote songs or sung songs about bloodhounds. I mean, the bloodhound blues actually becomes a piece of the cultural fabric and the folklore of black men who were locked in the penitentiary system. By the 1950s, particularly in larger urban centers like Baltimore, St. Louis, and Los Angeles, is where you see the official recognition and development of a canine unit within the police forces of these areas. Shortly after these canine units were formed, you actually have African American residents of these cities lodging complaints against the police departments because they had noticed that these dogs were being brought into their neighborhoods at much higher rates than they were in other neighborhoods, despite the fact that no crime was being committed that would require canines to be used. What we find initially, very shortly after the canine units are formed, is that the dogs are being used as an intimidation tool against marginalized communities. This was detected by the communities in question, but the police were able to essentially ignore the complaints and continue to use the canine units. Of course, the repercussions of this are the dogs of Birmingham and their use against civil rights protesters. Dogs are unrestrained once they are let loose to detain a suspect and can inflict maximum damage and force people into conformity or prevent their resistance. So if you see a protest occurring, a peaceful one, like what was happening in Birmingham, and you bring the dogs to the protest, you've already established a dividing line that suggests you are willing to inflict violence and you are willing to allow a dog that might lose control, against a peaceful protest in which protesters have not elicited any provocation. With the war on drugs and the assumptions that come along with that regarding black criminality is when you start to see a significant rise of using canines against people of color, but specifically African American men ranging from teenage years to mid-40s. Particularly dog psychologists have suggested that the dogs respond to even the subconscious of human handlers. When we talk about implicit bias and the dangers that occur with that particular thought pattern, is that an officer going into a situation where they're perceived to be nervous, the dog picks up on it.
Hey, there's a dog in that car. You fight, you're gonna get dog bit.
Let go now. I'm gonna shoot you, motherfucker! Here, handle, get your ass on the ground. Handle, get your ass on the ground.
So if an officer is in a situation where they get nervous and they are considering the possibility of conflict, the dog might actually lose control and just act. And we've seen this in some of the videotapes where a dog is attacking a black suspect despite the fact that the black suspect had done nothing to provoke the dog. But we suggest that perhaps it was picking up upon the senses of how the handler was feeling at that point.
Good boy.
Which I think for many is an argument against what handlers claim, and that they have complete control over the dogs at all times. I have met a number of African Americans who have met dogs that seem inexplicably uncomfortable around them. And even the owner themselves is not entirely sure why. But the dogs are perhaps picking up upon the subconscious emotions of the owner, or the dog may have been trained in a method where they were encouraged or coerced or beaten to see a person of African descent as an enemy. I don't know entirely what that means, as far as whether that means the dog is racist, but it doesn't mean they're racist in the same way that humans can be. But there are a number of people who seem to believe that a dog can be trained to be anti-black.
To the present, that is murkier, right? It's harder to say distinctly that this is even the same phenomenon. History doesn't repeat. History does sometimes rhyme. And I would say in the present day, statistics would bear out that the predominant use of state enforcement with dogs is against racial minorities.
Knowing that these dogs have been trained to attack black and brown, mostly, it really hurts. And it's scary. It's very scary. Because you don't know who has a dog. You just don't know what to look for no more. You don't know if you're gonna get shot, get a dog put on you, or what. You don't know. So it's very scary. I think if the dogs were trained properly, they wouldn't attack. But they're not being trained that way. They're being trained to attack. Canines are smart dogs. How you train them up, that's exactly what their reaction is gonna be. Knowing the history, knowing my history, knowing what the slaves went through, it really is traumatizing to be able to actually walk in their light, because this is something they went through. Now I see, because time and time again, sometimes I don't even like to talk about it, but I know I have to. But it is very traumatizing.